All right. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Brian Zimmer. I'm the field CISO here at CyberMaxx. Hopefully you're in the right place. If you came to talk and listen to a bunch of seemingly smart people talk about operational resilience in the face of modern healthcare cyber threats, you are in the right place. If you got here by accident, you probably want to stick around because it's probably going to be interesting. So I want to thank our partners at HS-ISAC. If you are not familiar with the organization, I would encourage you to check them out. I would also encourage you to participate in your local chapters and the national scene. That actually goes for any of these groups, any of the local conferences. I always encourage people to get active in the information security community, and I'm encouraging you to do that now. Again, HS-ISAC, great organization, and we'd like to thank them for allowing us to partner with them. So I'm joined by Justin Armstrong and Connor Jackson. Connor is a threat researcher here at CyberMaxx, and Justin is a consultant at Fellsway Group. I'm going to do a quick shout out to Fellsway Group. I have known them for 2.5, 3 years, an outstanding organization that a lot of people may not be familiar with. I would encourage you to check them out as well. See, I've already given you 2 action items and you just joined. Go check out Fellsway Group. They do some really great consulting, very impactful. Really impressed with the work that I've seen them do over the years that I've run into them in the market. All right, so let me tell you why you are here, hopefully, why you're here. By the time this thing ends, we want you to understand how modern cyber threats stress healthcare resilience, not just security controls. We're going to identify where resilience most often breaks down during real incidents, including coordination, decision-making, recovery. Then we're going to connect resilience outcomes to regulatory and audit expectations. We're going to thus ensuring response actions are defensible after the event. Next, we're going to help you recognize the role of MDR and governance in sustaining operations during disruption, not just detecting threats. And then we want you to leave with practical actions to strengthen operational resilience across people, process, and technology. And what Justin and Connor don't know is to lighten the mood. I've got some dad jokes that I'm going to slide in that are going to totally throw the 2 of them off and get them chuckling. So I'm going to start with the first dad joke. Here it comes. My friend was showing me his tool shed and pointed to a ladder, and he said, "That's my step ladder. I never knew my real ladder." So let's get started. See, I told you, I already threw him off. All right, Justin, describe what operate through adversity means.
Yeah, that's a great question, because I have seen that where organizations, especially in healthcare, they have to continue operating when systems are down. For instance, at one healthcare organization I worked with, the CEO wrote a nice letter after the ransomware attack where he said to people, you know, here we were attacked by a criminal organization. They took down our systems, but we continued to deliver babies. We continued to see patients. We continue to deliver healthcare. But that's very challenging. It really is adversity, because when people are used to using the electronic health records, they have the allergies at their fingertips. It does the drug interaction checking. You can press a button and it sends a prescription to pharmacy or an order to lab. All those things are, when those things are gone, maybe even your telephone network's down, that's such a challenge. But I've seen that healthcare organizations do step up. You know, you see people running things down to the lab. You see people picking up the phone and talking to the pharmacist. But it's still extremely challenging. And so that, to me, that's why I think of when I think of operating through adversity.
Connor, from a SecOps perspective, and that's security operations, what does operate through adversity mean?
To put it, I guess, in a single sentence, it's to keep things running when the technology or the people have started to fail. So you've got to plan for the worst, assume breach, put out those blast doors, with all those kind of buzzwords that we hear. What you really have to focus on is what is the bare minimum we need to keep operating. And from SecOps, we need logs, we need people to be able to communicate, we need to get things done.
I think by the way, that was more than one sentence. So I'm gonna call you out. So the thing I noticed just as a long time ago, incident responder, investigator, and I'm very grateful that I don't do that anymore. I don't think my stress level can take that. When we were talking before this, one of us wrote why most organizations discover their resilience gaps during an incident. Can you talk about why that happens? And I think a lot of that is preparedness. But can you speak on that just briefly?
Yeah, most resilience efforts, they're discussed in theory, but it's rarely ever put into practice. And ideally, it's not put into practice during an incident. You want to put that into a tabletop. But getting everyone together to do this tabletop isn't the easiest thing to do. So a lot of companies will, we'll do it next week, we'll do it next month, next quarter. It gets pushed off and off and off. And then you've never actually tested it. So you don't know where your gaps are.
Why do you think that happens, though? Do you think it's because we're so stretched thin in a SOC? Do you think it's a failure of imagination? Do you think it's a management failure? Do you think it's all the above, or maybe something I'm forgetting?
I think it's down to people are afraid their dog is going to growl at them if they say something silly. But more seriously, different teams operate at different speeds. So security teams, I think we're used to operating like at the drop of a hat. Something happened, 15 minutes, we're all on a bridge. We've done this a million times. Someone from another team, they might be used to operating 2 or 3 days ahead of themselves. So it might be, that difference in speed makes things a little bit more complicated to coordinate and get everyone together to be effective.
One issue I see is that, you know how it is when you're young, you're 18 or something, you always feel like you're invincible. Nothing bad can happen to me, no car accident, no nothing. But as you age, you get wiser and you realize that no, these things can happen to me. I think one of the problems is when you get a group of people together in a large organization, they don't think as a mature individual. They start to regress to almost being like young people again. So many people are, they just say this would never happen to our organization. This is what happens to other people, or they just can't imagine how something bad could happen to them until it does. And it's sad, but it's a common problem. And then when us security guys come along and explain the bad things that can happen, it makes us sound like fear mongers or that we're paranoid. But we're just trying to prepare. We're not saying this is going to happen. We just want you to listen and be prepared for it. So that way, if it does happen, it won't be so bad.
I agree with that. I do think I'm going to throw in a rare point of optimism here. So I've been doing this is my 27th year in InfoSec. I think we have gotten remarkably, I'm not going to use that word. I think we have gotten considerably better as professionals at conveying risk, at speaking to and with the business. So I think we are considerably better. I think one of the answers to my question to the two of you is I think SOCs and security operations just in general in the organization is so stretched thin that I don't believe that they have a whole lot of time to take out of their day to do a tabletop. And as we go through this, I think as we enter this next section, that's a perfect segue, Justin, for you to help the listeners understand how do you take time out of your day? How do you prepare? How does this become a valuable exercise and not just a checkbox exercise? Before we do that, I want to set the stage. Actually, no, Connor, I was going to ask you about ransomware gangs and organizations. I want to table that for a second. I think I want to pivot into the 5 threats and the 5 resilience stress tests, if it's all right with you guys.
Yeah.
Um, so before we do that, as I said, each of these segments, I want to lead in with a dad joke. Here comes my next one. I asked my date to meet me at the gym, but she never showed up. I guess the two of us aren't going to work out. All right, let's do it.
You definitely
5
read that in a
threats.
Christmas cracker.
What's that?
You definitely read that one in a Christmas cracker.
All right, 5 threats, 5 resilience stress tests. Justin, get us started.
Sure. Well, I always, my go-to is always ransomware because it's the whole organization test. It's kind of like the worst case scenario. Of course, there's different levels of ransomware. There might be some ransomware just affects a few devices versus other ones where the whole network's down, the phone system's down, things like that. That's always my go-to because it's nice to have the discussion about what would you do if all this technology just disappeared tomorrow? How would you continue to communicate? How would you know how to call someone? Like, for instance, if the phone system's down and you don't have their cell phone number, something as simple as that, and it's quite challenging. So that's my number one. You want me to go through the other 4?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, another one is third-party breaches because this seems to happen every day. I was just reading about one the other day where a employee got laid off for some reason at an organization. He still had access to one of their clients' databases and stole all sorts of PHI, protected health information. So that kind of thing, or sometimes it's the third party loses your data, and now you don't even know, can we get our data back? What have you lost? How can I notify people that their data's gone? And then close on the heels of the third party breaches is the data breaches. When we have a data breach, that can be challenging. Like, one of the worst kind of data breaches I see is not so much when the database gets accessed, because you often have logs showing what happened, but when someone's email is compromised, you don't know how much PHI is in that person's emails. Quite often it's a lot. And now did that get exfiltrated? There's the supply chain attacks, like we saw this past year, last year with the Change Healthcare, where a major supplier goes down. You never thought it would happen. It'd be like telling people, imagine Amazon is just gone. How are you going to get your subscription cookies in the email, in the mail? Things like that. That's a challenging one. And then the last one is 0 days, which is, you don't see it coming. If you don't have a modern next gen infrastructure, it can be difficult to spot a 0-day hack, which I know Connor will talk a lot more about too. So those are my 5.
Right. So
to add on to one of your points, Justin, as well about email, one of the things that we've seen attackers doing, particularly during like business email compromise, like BEC investigations, is they're running through your email chain. So they'll export one of these threads. They'll look at everyone who's on the chain and they'll start to register domains and impersonate people that are just, maybe they haven't even commented. They're just pretending to be someone who's on the chain. And then they'll try to pick that conversation back up with your vendors. And then they'll access them, email back, and it becomes this really ingrained problem to figure out where it started.
Yeah, that's really insidious. And it's like, as much as you train people about phishing, how are they going to detect something like that? Where someone's in an email chain responding. That's a rough one.
well, all right. So this is the question. I think this is why a lot of people are here. What do you do? What are the 2 or 3 recommendations from each of you in that space? Like, how do people prepare for this?
Yeah, one of the things that I always stress is it takes a lot of planning. Like, for instance, when something goes really wrong in the physical world, you'll see that some people freeze up. Like, if there's an active shooter event, some people freeze up. They don't know whether they should run or if they should just stay put or to go on the offensive. But then once they've gone to a training and they understand the priorities and the risks, they realize that, okay, this thing just happened. I just need to get out of here as soon as possible, and they run out the door. But other people freeze up under those situations. What do I do? They start asking around. And that's because they have never taken the time to figure out what their priorities are, plan what they would do ahead of time. So that's why, that's why I always stress, especially in healthcare, the importance of talking with the parties in advance and saying, how would you handle patient care with these systems down? You should have paper copies, things like that. So doing that planning in advance and then running through a tabletop exercise, which we'll chat about in a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Connor, what about you? Technical controls specifically, I would say.
Yeah. If you want a technical example, something that we often see is when someone accesses like an email account, for example. Probably upwards of 70% of companies today are using Entra ID or Azure AD. You can generate a access token and a refresh token. So within seconds, you've got 90 days of access that persists through password resets. Like, how do you protect against that? So that, to tie back into Justin's point about a tabletop, that's something you should test. Like, can you revoke sessions? Can you terminate these tokens? Can you change the password and get these things back under control? And the only way you're going to know is doing that in a controlled setting. You do not want to be doing this during an active incident.
Yeah. So this is the key, and I'll take a pause here. For those of you not familiar with the gentleman by the name of Sunil Yu talks about the age of recovery, and he talks about resiliency and recovery during events. And I think, Connor, what you just said is it fits nicely with that. We're not talking about preventative controls. We're not talking about detective controls. We're talking about what to do in the face of an actual adversary. And that's really the whole purpose of this webinar, and specifically what you're talking about. I think a lot of times in the market, we get really spun up and we talk about products and we talk about services, but we never talk about the actual things that you're talking about, getting smart people and smart systems doing smart and intentional things to systems to restore service.
A lot of the time, it's almost like if we throw enough money at the problem, if we buy this product or that service, it will be fixed, when in reality, it's an engineering issue. You need to look at it and build something around it, around the issue.
You got me thinking about something else too. Like, people obsess over the technology. Like, we have to set up these interfaces between these machines, but they never think about what about the interfaces between the different groups. The nice thing about getting together at a tabletop or in other discussions to plan these things is you form relationships. People learn to trust you. They understand what your priorities are. Also, you understand what their priorities are. Like, if we go to the clinical people and we say, hey, we're going to have to take this system down, and they tell us, well, by doing that, you've just disrupted our patient care in these ways, then you come up with some alternatives. Okay, well, let's make a local backup. Let's print some copies in advance. So that relationship building is so important. It's like the human interface.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. To add to that as well, it kind of shifts that mindset from these things being cybersecurity issues to being biz ops issues. Like, this is how we keep the business running. It's not just relegated to this one specific team.
Yeah, Connor, I think that goes back to what I was saying earlier. Like, I think we've gotten so much better. We're not there yet, but we've gotten really good at talking to the business about its business, as opposed to our products, our services, how great we are, how technical we are. Like, I go back to the late 90s and 2000s and just, frankly, how insufferable many of us, I'm talking about myself, were as information security people. And we just did such a mediocre job of speaking with, I'm using that preposition on purpose, speaking with the business about what the business wants and needs to maintain resiliency, which is the theme of this entire thing.
It was the Wild West back then.
Yeah.
It's a lot more coordinated now.
Let's hover on your 5 cases, Justin. So, but Connor, I'm going to start with you. Ransomware. This is, as Justin said, he called it in our internal notes, the ultimate resilience test. what does rapid isolation, what does that look like from your very technical perspective?
So to answer that, it raises another question is what are you trying to isolate? Every system has a different thing you need to do. And in more recent years, if you look at kind of like more of a macro lens, just the general business world has shifted to these web-based applications, SaaS-based products, everything is subscription-based. So your network perimeter has moved from, your firewalls, your VPN, like things you have logs on, into the user's browser, where they're now interacting with these services and where your business is interacting. And so sometimes you just don't have access to see that correctly. So you may not be able to see DOM or DNS queries correctly. So the way you would lock that down is entirely different to how you might lock down, say, a piece of maybe an endpoint or an entire network that's been compromised that you then have to just cut off. So identifying what the threats are to your business first and being able to put up a previous boss of mine referred to it as blast doors, and left of boom was his phrase. So he always wanted to be left of that. So yeah, isolation, keeping things like don't trust anything on your own network. Assume everything wants to hurt you, and then put things in place to stop that quickly.
Justin, there was, again, internal notes. Practice command structure. I think that's a place where both of your crafts and professions and areas of expertise really merge nicely together. What is practiced command structure for those that may not know?
Yeah, so for instance, imagine you're in the middle of a crisis. People are excited. The clinical people are nervous and anxious about patient care. The IT security people are trying to lock things down, and everybody's talking at once. That's not going to work. You need to have some kind of incident command structure that people have worked through in advance to understand that when we get on this meeting, we're not going to talk about, oh, woe is me. We're not going to talk about theoretical problems. We're going to say, here's our current priorities. We're going to make sure everybody gets heard, because one of the problems is you've got all different people. Some people dominate the conversation. Like we were joking earlier, how I'm part Italian. I don't look it, I know. But on that side of the family, it's the loudest person that gets to talk. We don't want that happening in a cyber situation. We want everybody to be heard. So you go through in the command structure, you kind of go through, have someone taking command of the meeting. You walk through, you get input from each person, you discuss what the top priorities are right now, and then you go off and do them, and you say, okay, we'll be back at this time to touch base and see where we are. So that kind of command structure is vital, and you have to practice it. You have to set that, it's like setting the culture in advance.
If I'm gonna go off of our kind of agreed upon flow here a little bit. Let me ask you, when we prepare for these things in healthcare organizations, and you said agreed upon, that means we need to have, number one, policies, procedures, a culture in place that says we're going to do this. We're going to get this tabletop exercise. We are going to agree that this is a thing that we want to do. For those listeners and watchers who haven't done this before, how much of a time investment is that first meeting or two, that first session or two? And then I'm going to ask you, my next question is, who needs to be involved? So first of all, first question, how long is that first session? What does that look like?
Usually I would recommend not going more than just an hour or two. You want to introduce people to the concepts, give them a chance to work through their first one and understand the priorities. So that's what I would say. And then the people that need to be there, people in leadership, as well as some of the people who are the practitioners, because we need the input from those who are actually doing the work. We can't just say, oh, our people will handle it. We want to know, what are some of the things that are going to be a big concern for them? Like, for instance, I love the points Connor brought out about, can we even isolate a system? Do we even know how to do that? Those are the things that people need to hear.
Connor, from the technical side of the house, from the SOC and the operations side, who do you recommend be present? How many people, skill sets, knowledge, skills, and ability? What's your recommendation?
So one of the things I think a lot of organizations overlook is when you're testing your command structures, you're also testing your documentation. It's like, are your documents up to date, and can you get the people who are written down as being in control online? How long does that take? So you might have someone written down as this person is in charge, and this guy's in charge of all our cloud infrastructure, and these people are in charge of patient data. And then you check your documentation, the phone number is 2 years out of date, staff have moved on, and now who's accountable? Like, who do you get in contact with? So that's a real big one, is making sure you can actually get the right people in place. After that, then the specific answer is it depends. Again, everything in cyber depends. But what it comes down to is like, what has been affected. So you should have your core team. So this should be, your BISOs, your security guys, general IT staff who have access, predetermined access to disable systems. And after that, then you need people that can communicate across these different organizations and teams. So typically these are like account executives, someone who's higher up the chain, maybe not so much on a technical perspective, but knows the business well, knows who to speak to get things done. So you usually want someone like that, and then a backup for everyone. You can't get person A, get person B.
There's an interesting concept that the guys at Fellsway made me aware of, let's call it about a year and a half ago. And that's to do these tabletops in two separate settings, if you want or if you need. Setting number one is executives. Setting number two is day-to-day players. Justin, can you talk about how that works and the value?
Oh yeah, 100%. Because when there's an incident, there's not going to be just one group meeting. When the incident first happens, the security and IT people will probably meet together, discuss what it is, then meet with the executives and leadership to brief them. And it's at that meeting that the whole team is at, and they will discuss, okay, how are we going to handle patient care? Go off and meet with your clinical staff and figure that out. IT, go off and figure out how to isolate systems. Security, go out and figure out how did these guys get in and who are the threat actors. So everybody has their role. So it's not difficult to break this out into multiple tabletops. You want to have a leadership tabletop. You want to have a tabletop with just clinical people where they talk about how they operate during the crisis. And you want to have IT and security tabletops. So each one's going to get to different levels of detail. The executive levels more focused on communicating both internally and with external organizations. What are we going to say publicly? How are we going to interact with the FBI and others? Whereas the technical team is going to be more focused on, what's our top priorities? What are our assets for addressing this? Things like that. So yeah, there's a lot of value into having the multiple tabletops.
I want to walk through your 5 use cases here. Let's talk supply chain. I love the way you framed it. You said cascading operational impact, and the resiliency focus is critical dependency mapping, business-driven recovery sequencing, and cross-organizational coordination. I'd like to hover over that one over all the others for just a second. Can you talk about supply chain attacks and how to maintain resiliency in the face of those?
Yeah, that one does require a lot of advanced preparation, because if you've never dealt with the team at your supplier, how are you going to know who to contact, especially if it's off hours? How do you know what they're able to do for you even? In some cases, these suppliers may say, like for instance, if you're dealing with a cloud supplier, so to speak, a CSP, they are going to say, well, we have our own incident response procedures and we're going to just lock you out of your system now. I've had that happen before where a supplier has said, you know what, you reported an incident to us, we're just going to lock down your access, and they kind of leave you hanging. So these are the discussions you have to have in advance. And what if that's a critical supplier? Maybe they're supplying, not a service like that, but maybe they're supplying a product or something. Do we have alternative suppliers? And that's always challenging. Like, for instance, with Change Healthcare, when their services went down, a lot of people had to scramble to find alternative suppliers, so to speak, to handle transactions because, for instance, Change Healthcare was processing all these claims for them. Now they had no money coming in. It severely impacted a lot of organizations. So yeah, understanding who to contact, what they can do during an incident, who our alternative suppliers are, and things like that, what they provide for us, like specifically, all those things are vital. And then having a plan for when they go down.
Right. When it comes to maintaining resilience, uptime, Connor, how much do you think the old adage of know your enemy comes into play? Is it, scale of 1 to 10? Do you think it's absolutely essential? Do you think it's the most important thing in the world to understand who the ransomware gangs are, who the adversaries are, what their TTPs are? Like, where do you come down on how much we should truly know the adversary in this space?
That's it's a great question because I get this a lot. There's always this discrepancy between what the threat intel guys see and what the incident response guys see. Like you'll get these threat feeds and it doesn't really mean anything to us, but it looks good on paper. And it's like, how do we use this? And then you have actionable intel. Just before this call, the three of us were talking about having a healthy level of paranoia and how in our world, we're used to just being paranoid, but to other people, it looks like we're crazy because we're assuming things can go wrong. So yeah, you can't really put a number on it because in my mind, you have to be paranoid. Zero trust is really the way forward. You have to assume that things can go wrong, and you should plan for that. Like with supply chain attacks, you should have a policy in place that means you don't make any changes to maybe banking information without picking up a phone and speaking to someone. And that ties back into an earlier point about those relationships that you have to build. If it's as easy as just sending an email to change banking information, you've spent, 50, 60, maybe $100,000, which has happened in a previous incident. All a threat actor has to do is compromise a single email address, which could be 2 or 3 clicks, and they've made, you're down 100K, maybe more.
Yeah, that's a great point because I remember one organization I was at, the only reason I could sleep at night was I knew that the finance and accounting teams had great procedures that they followed. No money was going out the door without it getting checked off by multiple people. And because of that, they never had a problem with these kind of business email compromise, So it allowed me to have a good night's sleep.
There's always that balance as well. It's like the more secure something is, the less functional or the less quick in function it can be. So trying to find that balance really depends on the specific organization.
I had a question. I was looking at the chat. By the way, for the listeners, watchers, there is a chat. You can throw questions or comments in there. Although we would prefer questions. Comments could get ugly quick. Let's keep it civilized on a Thursday. Compensating controls when it comes to recovery. This was interesting. I feel like somebody had seen my talk in 2025. When it comes to compensating controls, Connor, we'll start with you. Across all 5 of the 5 threats, 5 resilience tests, what are your top 3?
Logging is probably the first one. Have your logs in place and know what you don't know, which is actually a lot more difficult than you think. Having something in place that will tell you, if your logs have gone down as a secondary on top of that, because that is something that we've seen. during an incident where an attacker has wiped logs or just turned them off. On your endpoints, it's one single command and they can disable Defender. Do you have something in place to tell you when your control system, your primary control system has gone down? Do you have a secondary backup in case something gets wiped? And that kind of, there's a big conversation around disaster recovery and your backups, which will probably take an hour by itself.
Yeah, maybe 3 hours.
I can see everyone nodding. That's, I think that's probably a good point.
Yeah. Justin, what do you got?
So yeah, I kind of break it down into three basic areas, although backups are very important. I kind of, that one is always in my mind. I didn't include it on my list of three, but actually testing your backups, making sure they're not corrupted, making sure you can actually do a restore. All those things are vital. But one of my top ones has always been strength and security where the problems start, and that's the endpoints, the end users, the identity. Have multi-factor authentication. I mean, I hate to say it because it should be, everybody should have multi-factor authentication by now. But you need that email protection, you need strong security awareness, you need good procedures for people to follow, like when validating whether or not to do that wire transfer. So that's one area. Another area is the downtime procedures. How do you react to your incident response? How do you maintain operations during the event, like we talked about, doing the tabletop exercise, identifying the problem areas, working through clinical workflow, actually taking the time to have all the nurses go through, hey, let's document a patient entirely on paper, things like that. And the third one, which is not easy, is hardening the environment. I find that to be challenging. You really have to know your network. You have to figure out how can we microsegment things. I mean, people often put the medical devices off on their own network, but what about other critical areas? Can we put finance off on their network? We have a separate guest network, a separate camera network, things like that. What about our configuration? Looking at maybe the CIS benchmarks. Can we apply those? You're not able to apply every part of the benchmark because stuff breaks, but that takes a lot of time to get to that point where you've hardened your environment. You don't have unnecessary accounts running or unnecessary products installed. That's clearly a dot your I's, cross your T's kind of effort.
Mm-hmm.
To add on to your point as well, Justin, about the OT network. Many years ago, on a pen test we were doing for a healthcare org, we were able to transition from the IT into the OT network, and one of the guys on the team was able to access like medical equipment, specifically a CT scanner, which was terrifying and really meant a phone call had to be made. But one of the questions that I personally have received is like, how can we monitor on these devices when they're not physically connected? So one of the things that we've been doing the last maybe 4 years is putting in place deception devices. So these are devices that are built to look like something else. A common one we use is just a file server because threat actors love files, they love your files. So we'll set them up, they look like a file server, and the alert for it just comes out over DNS. So a threat actor scans it, your security team knows about it, but you don't have, you don't have EDR in that section of the network, but you've now been tipped off that something is not quite right. So yeah, it's a common question I get a lot, so I think it's worth mentioning in case anyone here is facing that problem right now.
I love that. Not enough people do the deception. I mean, it's kind of like sticking your car out like a decoy car out on your street and leaving the doors all unlocked to see who breaks in,
This is another 5-hour webinar. Yeah, we partner with Thinkst. We use canaries. We use canary tokens. I've been a huge fan of theirs for a very long time. I think it's a great solution, but yeah, another webinar clearly. Gentlemen, I'm looking at the time. I think it's time to end with our final takeaways. But first, I have a math dad joke. This year's Fibonacci convention is going to be really special. Apparently, It's as big as the last two put together.
Love obscure math jokes.
I just noticed Connor go just,
Yeah, I
yep,
can feel my
fingertips to temple.
I can feel my father figure getting bigger listening to these stat talks.
Fantastic. All right. I'm going to give you guys your final takeaway. I'm going to go back to the chat and make sure there aren't any questions that we haven't already covered. Um, Connor, final takeaway: building resilience in the face of adversaries. What are your final three? What does somebody need to do right now if they're in healthcare to build resilience from your perspective?
So I think we've mentioned the word a few times. If you're doing bingo, you can cross this off now. But you got a tabletop. If you're not doing these tabletops, you're setting yourself up to fail. Like during an incident, the people that are in charge sometimes they freeze up, as Justin was saying earlier. And some personalities just shine in these stressful environments, but you have to tabletop them to know like who really is the people that you want involved. Uh, Second, verify that you can contain endpoints, devices, users, services.
Mm,
Can you actually contain these things? And that there's two parts to that. There's the technology section. Like, do you have the products and tools in place to contain something? And second, do you have number one, the people to do it and the knowledge, but number two, the communication to be able to ask them to contain something. And then the third point, like we've said this earlier as well, is your escalation tree. Who's in charge? How do you get in contact with them? And how long does it take to get everyone together on a bridge to actually have something to take away? Um,
uh,
we mentioned
yeah.
earlier about some ransomware gangs as well.
Mhm.
Anyone who was on the Health-ISAC web monthly threat briefs might have heard me mention about a gang called Chilin. They have been the most prominent gang all last year, and in the last 30 days, they have been the most active in healthcare as well. So nothing has changed there in the last 12 months. If you want a threat group to tabletop, look at Chilin. We put out a blog last year on what they're doing and their TTPs, so you can use that as a starting point.
That is, I want to hover over that for just a second. So if you're wondering how to get started, what Connor just said is your roadmap. It is take that specific gang and tabletop their TTPs, tabletop what they do, how they do it, etc. That can be your map. Is that a fair synopsis of what you just said?
Yeah, the first thing I would do is get all the people together, time that. Second thing, and do this all on the same call. Come up with a fake scenario. So maybe one of your nurses receives a phishing email. What can someone do with that level of access, and then work from there? Go to
Mhm.
IT. What happens if one of your file servers gets compromised? What happens when maybe ransomware has been deployed or your data's been exfilled? Can you tell that that's even happened before it comes up in the news, or you see it on the dark web? So making sure you can do all those things, they all come together to really tie it in.
That's awesome. We had two questions on that. That's perfect. Justin, take us home with your big three.
Well, kind of mentioned before about strengthening security at the end user and endpoints, the downtime procedures, the hardening the environment. But I would say my number one takeaway is just to focus on the culture. Everything else will fall into place. If you educate people and you get them excited about cybersecurity and you do a lot of outreach, like for instance, at one company I was at, we had about 4,000 employees, and I did a lot of internal trainings and webinars and in-person events back in the day where we would get people excited to talk about here's what the attackers are doing, here's what you can do, and here's how you can help us. You almost make it a little competitive too when you get people saying who can report the most phishing emails, things like that. And also you help people with their own problems. You say, you know what, you're dealing with scammers, you're dealing with people trying to take over your Facebook account. Here's what you can do. And pretty soon you've developed a culture where people are happy to come to you. They see you as a trusted ally. They ask you questions. So that's always my number one go-to is build the culture. If you've got a good team and you're all work well together, that's like half the battle right there.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Go ahead, Connor. Sorry.
Justin, you hit the nail on the head. Having people having a personal investment makes a huge difference. Then it's just another thing they have to do for work. When they're personally invested, they're much, much faster and more involved with the actual process.
A lot harder to do in this remote first world, unfortunately, but it's something that I keep working on is like try and engage, go to the team meetings of the different work groups, get invited and, like I like to joke, yeah, I'll come and we do birthdays and bar mitzvahs. We'll show up. We'll be your act.
I think that's another, we should, the three of us should just do nothing but webinars for the rest of the year, because that can be another one, how we've matured as information security professionals but we still have some ways to go in not judging and in helping people. And much like our friends in the medical profession, if somebody comes in with an ailment, you're there to protect them and help them and get them on their way, not necessarily to judge them. If they've got high cholesterol, if they've got high blood pressure, we're not there to judge. We're there to help and offer empathy. And I honestly, I'm going to end on a high note. I think as security professionals, we've come a long way. Is the battle won? No, but I think Justin, to your point, like when people report incidents, they have to understand that, hey, we're here to acknowledge it and we're here to get to work on it, not to judge and not to make you regret reporting that incident. Like that's the worst thing we can do as professionals.
I love that analogy. I've actually never heard that one before, but that's spot on about, you don't make fun of people for their ailments as if they're somehow at fault, Sometimes we're at fault. We didn't do a good job educating, and that's why they have the problem.
That's another webinar too. Well, hey, for those of you that joined, big thanks. For those of you that are listening to the recording, thank you so much for taking the time. Justin, thanks for joining Connor and I. It was a pleasure.
Likewise.
And Connor, this is this is our first one is employees of CyberMaxx that we've done together. So it was a pleasure. I had a blast.
Likewise.
Natalie is our facilitator. Do we need to cover anything else? I think you're gonna throw up a slide there to take us home, or maybe not. Maybe I'm just gonna say, okay. So thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Have a great rest of your week, and bye-bye, everybody.